Hey guys, so before I get into the review itself, almost immediately the one thing I want to apologize in terms of this review being a day late because what had happened is the site I the site I pretty much normally use it in order to watch the Shaman King reboot. It pretty much never updated. It never updated to chapter 3 to episode 3, and it still hasn't. Frankly, I don't know what's going on there. So what happened is I just pretty much left it for I pretty much left it for I pretty much left it for pretty much today, and and I went to another site. So yeah, that's kind of the explanation there. Um, with that said, though, the first thing to talk about is how this episode pretty much introduces us to pretty much two more regulars of the series: Tao Jun, Ren's sister, and Li Pyron. Which immediately with those introductions, we're already introduced to a new concept of the shaman world: a Taoist or Daoshi, shaman who can control corpses of the dead. And yeah, watching this episode makes me realize how much that concept was toned down in the original anime, and not even the 4Kids broadcast, but with the Japanese broadcast as well. Because while the episode itself isn't an outright gore fest or anything, neither does it shy away from showing the morbid nature of bringing the dead back to life. But even more so than that, we also get a glimpse into how these concepts and practices can have been twisted and perverted by the Tao family. And this does carry over the idea that anything, no matter how noble it may be, can just as easily be corrupted. And that everything is equally capable of both good and evil. And I feel the thing I feel that that's something that is much more pronounced in this version is just how much the Tao family's practices and legacy have twisted like June and Ren. Like I think that's the one thing that's actually a bit more of an improvement over the original is we get more of a sense for how a lot of what the Tao family has done has twisted Tao and Ren's perspective on ghosts and shamans and just how these practices are handled. Like you can see that the Tao family itself is very responsible for basically June for June and Ren's whole idea of like that pretty much that from spirits are just weapons. A lot of that is from their family. Um, now, obviously, one pretty much minor thing to talk about is pretty much the whole translation of pretty much Pyron's name, because in the um in the 4Kids in the original anime, I think both in 4Kids and I think both in 4Kids and the Japanese dub, it was pronounced Li Pai Long, which, yeah, it's one of those things where honestly there isn't pretty much too much of a crossover. Like that's one of those things where I would have been completely fine if they had pretty much gone Li Pai Long again. But since they're going, I think with the manga, I guess it only makes sense that they would go with the original Japanese name of pretty much Li Pai Ron. Um, In fact, but going back to what I said before, one thing I really appreciate about this episode is how after Pyron pretty much regains his consciousness and his senses back, I I feel like Karma I feel the whole thing of from Pyron like getting his senses back and attacking June. I feel that that's one of those moments where I pretty much feel that pretty much Karma had pretty much come back to pretty much bite June in the ass for her mistreatment of Prince Pyron way harder in this episode than it did in the original anime. Which I do have to say, it is interesting just what it is interesting. I think this episode is kind of a weird example, an interesting example of how just a few added scenes and moments can pretty much actually do so much for an episode and give it pretty much way more weight. Like the moment that pretty much Pyron like pretty much gains his memories, his consciousness back. He immediately he immediately flashes all the everything he had pretty much endured at the hands of the Tao family and how. And yeah, you pretty much generally get get kind of emotionally attached to pretty much Pyron's struggle, even though he's trying to kill someone. Um, with that said, one little problem I have with this episode is Jun's introduction, and this is something that I actually openly admit was handled better in both the manga and the original anime, which is they gave Jun a little bit more of a build up, and interactions even before jumping into the fight itself with Yo. But here it pretty much skips all the build up and just jumps right into the fight, which it I suppose it isn't. Obviously, it's one of those things where pretty much the studio, obviously the studio is going to want to do something a little bit different from the manga, and little different from the manga and the original anime. But I pretty much feel like I pretty much feel that pretty much not having that build up of getting to know Jun just a little bit more before jumping into the fight, it can come across as a touch jarring, honestly. Also, I'm pretty sure that another thing is I'm pretty that was cut, honestly, is I'm pretty sure that this episode, like, I think I think in certain places it actually cut a large bulk of the out of the fight itself, which I'm a little iffy on when it comes to this series specifically, but I think it generally got across the same idea. And I love how in the end we pretty much get to see we basically get to see Pyron's perspective after being defeated, about being a resurrected corpse, and how his perspective on that had changed with the idea that, hey, I can maybe achieve what I had failed to do in life. It's kind of, if I'm a corpse. So yeah, it's kind of like a weird morbid twist, but and a unique look at the whole being immortal thing. Like a lot of people in fiction, they pretty much tend to see immortality one of two ways, which is that they see it as a gift or as a curse. But with Pai Long, he pretty much he sees it as a gift, but he sees it as a gift in a way, as a means to an end, where I can pretty much do what I had set out to do in life if I'm a mortal corpse. So yeah, kind of an interesting twist in that respect. Um, Now, let's talk about the title of the episode, Anna and Tao Jun, which in some ways is kind of misleading considering Anna's role in the fight with Jun and Pyron is about the same as it was in the original anime. However, one thing I do also have to say is that compared to the original anime, I feel is given more to do in the episode overall, and that does create a lot more of a contrast between that does create a lot more of a contrast between between from Jun's role as a Daoshi and Anna's role and Anna's role as an Itako. And I do like how we get a deeper dive into both spiritual practices in this episode. It's not full. It isn't like anything as fully expanded on, but we get a little bit more detail into a lot of this stuff. Um, and for as much as I'm not a fan of Anna herself, I also like how how she did drive home exactly what I said last episode, which is that Yo barely survived the encounter with Ren, and only because he was able to tap into the deepest reserves of his power. But if he doesn't learn to get to strengthen his overall fighting ability, then he will die the next time he crosses blades with Ren. And this fight with Jun was definitely the best testing ground to do that, because as Pyron himself is kind of uses as a punching bag that fights back. Like really, when you get down to it, like Pyron in this episode is a walking corpse punching bag. Is a corpse punching bag. Like that's really all he was. But like I said, they also give him depth to this. They also give Pyron depth, so he's a punching bag with depth, I guess you could say. I also like how, just like the manga, we're getting much more like visual imagery of Pyron's attacks. Like every time he pretty much grenade kick or something like that, we see a bunch of grenades and whatnot. Like little details like that, I think are improvements over the original, honestly. Um, now. Now one thing I think is kind of improvement for me in this episode is from weirdly a lot of the build up that we've gotten with the Shaman tournament itself, because and how we touch on it a lot. We touch on the importance of it a lot more in this episode because it. Don't get me wrong. It definitely and because the thing is with the Shaman tournament in the original for me is that it was largely kind of one of those it was one of those things where it was played up as a big deal, but it didn't really ever feel like a big deal. Like it didn't really feel like the Shaman tournament had any real effect on the wider world or anything like that. It just felt like a pretty much tournament. It felt like something that was just kind of that was disconnected from pretty much everything else in the world going on. So to see it more tied into the actual story and again its actual effects, it it being built upon does add this extra urgency I never felt from the original. But I guess it's one of those things where I can't completely blame the original either at this because the original anime did happen during the time where the manga was still being published. So I think they just pretty much did what they could, but pretty much did what they could. And I think one way they tried to do it is just by focusing on the characters more. Um, but yeah, adding those extra stakes does help me feel more invested. Now, I think there may be people who also say that the whole shaman tournament is maybe a little overly dramatized in in this series, but again, I feel that's kind of I feel it's kind of a necessary thing to do right now. But yeah, guys, that's all I got for this review. If you enjoyed the video, like, comment, subscribe. I'm on Twitter, Facebook, Twitter, or smash the like bell. Analyst or Crunchyroll. Death Night of Anime, signing off. Later, guys.